All right, Kiss Army, welcome to the KissFAQ Podcast. Thank you for giving us your time today and letting us into your head. I hope we don't do any damage. This is a Kiss-related podcast by the board, for the board. We hope that you enjoy. Welcome to a special edition, episode 206, of the KissFAQ Podcast. I am joined today by the one, the only, Mitch LaFawn. It is good to see you again, as always. We've had you on the show a few times, but once again, it's good to catch up on some of the things that have been going on in your life. And you're a busy guy these days, so why don't you just let everyone know where they can find you and what you are actually doing so that they can, if they want to stop listening now, they'll at least know where to find you.
Well, I have a show on Westwood One called Rock Talk with Mitch LaFawn, and it's very convenient because it is now on Spotify, Amazon Alexa, Apple Podcasts, Google Play. It is on the Westwood One app. It's on the Westwood One website. It really is sort of very easy to find. And of course, a lot of the magazines like Blabbermouth and Ultimate Classic Rock and stuff, they pick up a lot of my interviews, and they're kind enough to embed the player and stuff. So it really, you just Google Mitch LaFawn, and it's pretty easy to get. I personally really love the Spotify feed. It's like a sense of accomplishment to be on Spotify. I don't know why, but it just seems more legitimate. I don't know. Weird, but there it is.
Yeah, and you'll be counting up the pennies on Spotify, right? We're in the process of trying to get on Spotify as well, and if we do manage to accomplish that, like some of the other KISS-related podcasts already have, then obviously it is a great sense of accomplishment. But you seem to be going from strength to strength with the interviews that you've been doing, and that's really the purpose for this quick catch-up today with you. You recently were blessed, graced, anointed with interview with the great, the one and only, the Paul Stanley. Can you just tell us how that came about? Because I know you did your first interview with a KISS member, 38 years ago, and it was Gene Simmons, and I think you had a little story that you told in your preamble to the interview about that interview and who it was supposed to be with, and whatnot.
I'll just repeat that here just real quick. The original interview back in 1980, in June of 80, for the Unmasked album, when I was 11, was supposed to be with Paul Stanley. And at the last minute, that got switched out, and O'Coin management phoned, or was it Glickman and Marks? Well, either way, they phoned and said, would you mind if it's Gene Simmons? And I was like, listen, I don't care who it is, really. I'll talk to the manager, And so we did that, and then around the Hits tour, the Hot in the Shade tour, it was, I believe, October of that year, 89 or something. KISS was coming here, supposed to talk to Paul. He had busted up his ribs. He even played the show with a thing around his ribs. And they were like, well, he's not going to be doing any interviews. He needs to rest, blah, blah, blah. Fair and reasonable. Somewhere around, 2003, 2004, they were going to do the Aerosmith tour. And I had done all the legwork. I had spoken to management. The publicist was all set to go. And I was working for Brave Words magazine at the time. And just before my editor said, no, I'll be doing the Paul Stanley interview, contacted the publicist without me knowing, by the way, and said, I'm the editor, I'm doing this interview, Mitch is off the assignment. And it's like, assignment? It wasn't even assigned to me. I had the wherewithal to say, I'm going to go do this. And anyway, long story short, he did the interview and I was cut out of that. And then after that, I've had a chance to interview Eric Singer and Tommy, and I've done Gene, but there was always a circumstance where it didn't happen with Paul. And so out of all the original members, out of all the members, because I've interviewed Vinny, that was the one that was missing, and here it is, and it happened. And how it happened is I emailed Doc McGee. I had heard, of course, as we all do in sort of the KISS world, there's this coming, there's that coming, blah, blah, blah. And I said, hey, can we do an interview to talk about what's coming? This was somewhere back in, July or August, and they said, listen, we're going to be announcing stuff in the fall. Why don't we wait for the fall? And then they went on AGT, America's Got Talent, and they did. And I said, okay, cat's out of bag. How about now? And they said, well, we're announcing something a little later on. Do you want to do it then? And I was like, no. I'd rather be first out of the box, And so we did the interview. And right now, as we speak, there's really just the Rolling Stone interview and my interview. And I, in fact, would have beaten Rolling Stone to the street, but I only do a show on Mondays. I had to hold it. Rolling Stone got theirs out first, whatever. But yeah, no, it was that. And so very big thank you to Doc McGee. I mean, he could have said no. He could have said, "Well, you do it when everything's announced." But nope, set it up, sent me off with the team there, and off we go. And incredibly nice, incredibly graceful, and it was great. It was absolutely great. As a Kiss fan, to interview Paul, like anybody else, we're just very, very passionate about this band. And we've had all the discussions about this member and this album and that album and why they did this and their set list. And I don't think any of us are mean spirited when we have those discussions. I think we're just very passionate, and we argue over our passions basically. And
Absolutely. That's totally what it's about. It's not
right.
about hate. It's not about negative energy, though it may sometimes teeter on the brink of that passion gets dark and it's so, it envelops our souls in such a way. But no, it's never from a negative point of view.
Right. And those of us who say, well, we want Ace or Peter, or Love Gun is better than Destroyer, we passionately feel about that, and it's not disparaging to whoever else. But anyway, so I got the interview, and I really wanted it to be a celebration of Kiss. I didn't want to get into any of that nonsense, any of that negativity, and it's the wrong place to do that, right? You don't want to get on with Paul Stanley and then start airing a laundry list of nonsense. And it really is nonsense. At the end of the day, they've been around 45 years, and we're still here because they touched us in some way. They meant something to us. And to somehow deny it or trivialize it to me was silly. And so it was just great to talk to Paul. And if you heard the interview at the beginning, the first thing I say is, you know what? Thank you for 45 years. And that wasn't, some kind of strange play or something. It was a very sincere, thank you, because a lot of what Kiss was defines us. When you listen to what Gene Simmons says about you work hard, you strive, those are sort of life lessons that go beyond the music, beyond Destroyer, beyond me. They've actually, if you follow their career, have had a great sense of life lessons of it doesn't matter what people say. You do what you want, you stick to it, you move forward. Anyway, it was a great pleasure to talk to Paul and just say thank you. And I even said, and thank you for the fans. I know we're passionate and sometimes crazy, but at the end of the day, thank you.
Yeah, and that I really liked. And I'm not here to stroke you today about this interview. I'm jealous, but I'm also proud that you did an interview with Paul, kind of a similar way to I would approach it. The first thing I always say to Paul or any member of the band that I meet is thank you. And that's always important. Whether I get to ask another question or say anything further is irrelevant to the point of thanking them because they have been such an important part of my life. And that's evident in what I do and what I've done and what I continue to, and what I hope to continue to do. To always let them know. I'm sure they hear it a million times, but they haven't heard it from me or from you. So it was nice
Right.
for you to start off on that. Obviously, your parameters for your interview were pretty clear. And as you mentioned, there are some things that, aren't appropriate for the discussion that you were going to be having with him. But one of the, you will have seen some of the discussions that have been going on the FAQ message board about your interview. And those are some of the things that I think we can kind of talk about today in how you approach this interview, how you get your questions together. And I'm also curious if you do something similar to like I do with some of these higher end, it doesn't get any higher than Paul Stanley, but an interview where I just say if I ask you or say anything that you don't want, and just say no comment and we won't continue along those lines or whatever. So how you approach and set yourself up when you're talking to someone like Paul for such a long anticipated interview. So tell us how that side of things work for you.
Well, for every interview, I always do an incredible amount of research. You hear 20 minutes or 30 minutes of an interview. There's about 3 or 4 hours of prep time behind it to really understand the albums, to really understand. Now, of course, with Paul, it was a lot easier, because I've been a fan. There doesn't nearly need to be that kind of research. And, with the Paul interview, you sort of have to balance out. They have a message that they wanted out, which was the tour, and you've got to respect that. And the same thing with the other interviews with Red Dragon Cartel and with Accept and all the other interviews I do. I always approach it that the reason they're on the phone with me today is what? Tour, album, new T-shirt. I have to prioritize that. I have to talk about that first. That's how I approach it, because there's nothing more annoying if you're an artist, from my perspective, where you get, Slash on the phone who's talking about the new Slash record, and you go, "Oh, great. So tell me about Axl." And then you don't talk about it, right? Or with Paul, you go, "Oh, hey, Paul, tell me about The Elder." But we're doing a tour. Oh, that's okay, right? It seems somewhat rude to me to approach it that way. So I always make sure that whatever is putting us on the phone is what we're talking about first. Now, I have to say, in the case of Paul, or any artist, I don't write out questions. What I do is I develop sort of an arc in my head about, I'm going to start here, the new stuff, and I'm going to sort of develop it. It's almost like a rainbow. I'm going to develop it and end up over here. And I usually consider the last question like the hang up question, because I figured I'll ask that one question that's maybe a little more pushed, and if they hang up on me, at least I've had half an hour and it's not the end of the world. But yeah, with most of them, I don't write anything out. I just sort of have the general gist of where I want to go. And with Paul, I was particularly open and free in the sense that I've been there for 40 years with them. I've been there since 1978. I know the story, I know the history, and we'll see what Paul says. We'll see how comfortable he is. We'll see if we're getting, is he towing the company line, or if he's being a little more free. And I thought he was incredibly open and honest. And so that's why I could bring up something like Psycho Circus and ask about, the reunion tour on a more personal level. And I just sort of went with the flow. We'll go where it goes. And I think it went great. And quite honestly, at the 40-minute mark, I sort of stopped the interview and said, okay, thank you. Because I was given 20. We got to 30, we got to 40, and it happens sometimes. I'm not saying this would have happened with Kiss, but you'll get a phone call from a publicist saying, "Hey, we gave you 20 minutes and you spoke 40. What the hell? Next time we have an interview, we're not giving it to you because you don't respect the rules." So we got to 40. I'm sure if I had wanted to, Paul would have gone to an hour. I had a sense that he was fine talking and wouldn't have hung up. So I had to stop it at 40, but that's sort of the way I approach it. You start off very respectfully, plugging what needs to be plugged, and then you sort of see where it goes. And I think it went great. I think it was well received, and I think the fans, and I've seen the stuff on FAQ where the fans say, "Well, you didn't ask about this." And
That,
that's fine, but
and that's
you've
also
got
not how it works. You do not have this interview subject chained to the wall, hooked up to electrodes. And if they
right.
don't answer a question, they get a zap. That is not how it works.
No,
You really do have to respect the person's time, as you've just mentioned. I mean, if you get 15 minutes, as consumers, people obviously don't understand all the background that goes into putting out an interview and how much editing and how limited you often are. When you have 15 minutes, you have a highly distilled amount of time and questions that you can ask them, and it does usually revolve around what they are wanting to push, the reason d'etre for talking to you in the first place, as you mentioned. So
yeah.
you have to be very careful. So the Psycho Circus questions, on the board, why didn't you ask about this? Why didn't you ask about that? Does that offend you when people listen to your interview that
No.
you're thrilled and happy about, and their first response to that interview is, why didn't he ask such and such?
No, not offended at all. What I always say to myself is I go, you don't understand the process, because it's not one interview. It's a collection of interviews over the years. And the reason I get to go from, Nazareth to Red Dragon Cartel to Accept to Gene to whoever to Paul is because people know that when they talk to you, you respect the rules, you respect the parameters. I had an interview this morning. I'm not going to say which guy, but he's an ex-member of a band. It has nothing to do with Kiss. And they told me right up front, do not ask about the last band, period. And you have to respect that, because if you are disrespectful of that, you will have one interview and you will never have another one. And I'm not even talking about an interview with that member. You'll just never have another interview. People don't seem to understand that it's a very small community. You look at I'm just there's one publicist I deal with. Her name is Fiona. She deals with Simple Minds, REO Speedwagon, Sammy Hagar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if I have a Simple Minds interview and I screw her out of the time, or I ask the question she told me not to ask, well, then I lose Sammy Hagar. I lose REO Speedwagon. And then what she does, she gets on the phone to her friend who's a publicist, and that publicist handles whoever, Kiss and Metallica. And she goes, if that Mitch guy calls you, you don't talk to him. And people don't seem to understand that it's not this free-for-all where it's freedom of speech and you have a First Amendment right to ask. It's not. It just isn't. And the reason why I'm still around after all these years, Eddie Trunk is still around after all these years, Chris Jericho is still around, is because you know how to play the rules and you also know how to bend them just slightly enough that it doesn't break, but you sometimes get those interviews that become exclusive and become very important. And so when somebody says, well, you didn't ask about Bruce Fairburn. Well, okay, but we want to know about Paul Stanley. We don't really want to know about Bruce Fairburn. And I think if you actually listen to the interview, he did answer the questions. You know, he did say Paul, Peter, and Ace weren't up to snuff, according to him. And, you know, do we really need to get inside Bruce Fairburn's head to find out why he didn't think? I think the answer is obvious. If you don't think this guy deserves to be in an album, it's because you, for some reason, don't think he can cut it. He doesn't play well enough. He's not prepared enough. Whatever it is, that's the decision. So it just seems sort of a redundant question to say, well, spell it out black and white. Why? It seems silly, but listen, you've got 45 years of career. You have 20 minutes of scheduled time. You're obviously going to not. I think did I answer on FAQ or did I answer on my Facebook? I said to him, for every one question you ask, you know minimally there's 50 that you didn't ask, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's not an 18-hour interview. There's obviously going to be questions you can't ask, and you know, and the other thing I do when people do that, and this is going to sound really bad, I always look at them and I go, you know what? You want to ask the question? You go get an interview with Paul, or you go get an interview with, you know, Lars Ulrich, or you go get an interview with whoever, and we'll compare the two. Until then, you know, just enjoy.
Yeah, and you know, number one, it's free. Enjoy it for what it is. There's, you know, trying to do it, and I just learned this last month in Nashville when I went to the Rock and Pod Expo. 15-minute time slots for interviews are brutally tough to organize your thoughts for. Now, I do write out my stuff, and I do have circled my got-to-haves, and then it's where the tone takes you as well. It's not just about what we are promoting, the reason we're interviewing. It is where that person goes, and you're only reading it in terms of hearing their responses and their voice, and whether they seem happy and relaxed. And that's what struck me with Paul. He seemed incredibly at ease and relaxed, and his answers didn't seem canned to me. They seemed well-reasoned and thought out, and as Paul, he's impeccable in his presentation of his thoughts. He speaks very well. Always strikes me impressively. So you read all of those elements as you're going along, and you've got all your questions organized in your head, and you don't know ultimately where this is going to end or when it's going to end. You've got 20, might become 30, might become 18 as well, easily.
Oh, yeah. Listen, I've done a bunch of interviews over the years where I was given half an hour, and you start talking to the person and you realize they're either in a bad mood, they don't have a lot to say. You get a lot of sometimes interviewers or interviewees that give you yes, no answers. You go, so tell me about the new album. They go, oh, it's really great. Okay. And why is it really great? Oh, because we did the best we could. Right. And what's the best you could? Well, we played our hearts out. And you're like, I got a half an hour with you? Really? Like, you know? So no, you have to judge, but I think the most important skill in doing interviews is not having 87 questions ready or 18 hours of research. I think it's listening. You have to listen. And if you listen to any of my interviews, you will hear me say, hey, you just mentioned this. Let me take you up on that. And a lot of times I didn't have that question about that, or I didn't find that of interest enough that I would mark it down. And then you hear them talk about it either passionately or dispassionately, and you go, whoa, there's something there. I got to go down that rabbit hole and see, why did he mention that band member? Why did he mention that song? Why did he, specify that era? And then, whoops, you take a sharp left or you take a sharp right, and your interview is not going where you think it's going to go. It goes somewhere else. And I think that's the most important skill when you see the people that have been doing this for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I think a lot of what we share is the ability to sit back and listen and go, Paul just mentioned this, Gene I need to explore that, and you go with it. Because I've seen interviews where people have 10 questions on a paper and they go, and the person answers and they go, right, okay, great, question 2. And you go, question 2? Did you hear what he just said? What? Did you, how do you let, and I've seen it. I work a lot of festivals and I see a lot of these media scrums, these media things backstage, and a lot of them are, and I don't want to sound like I'm putting anybody down, but you see a lot of sort of fanzines and internet thingies where the person is not a professionally trained anything, and they start asking these, and and it's very stiff and it's very cold, and you go, okay, this is what today's going to be like. Okay, so no, you have to listen. Listening is the important skill, and paying respect. It doesn't matter who you're talking to. It doesn't matter if you hate the band or you love the band. They have to be the most important person you're talking to that day. And you have to remember that the person who's going to listen to you talking to that guy is a fan of the band, and they don't want you to be smart-assy, smart-alecky, disrespectful. So you have to be, I'm talking to the guy from Nazareth today. Guess what? Nazareth's the greatest band I've ever heard of. And it doesn't have to be true or false. It just has to be, because that fan who's going to check out that interview, that's how they feel about it. And they want to hear you do a good job. And so respect, listening, that's I think those are the keys.
And you're the conduit. You're taking the information from the source to the end user, ultimately. So it's very important to do that. And, that's what I enjoy about the in-person interviews, because you get to make eye contact with the person, you get to read body language, you get to, have a little bit more personal kind of connection than on the phone. But getting back to Paul Stanley, I mean, he's the last member of the band that you've collected now.
Yep.
in your list of accomplishments. And obviously you did meet Eric and Mark St. John, even though you did not interview them.
Nope.
Are you surprised by how well the interview went with Paul? Did you have any preconceived notions about how it was going to, or he was going to be? Or were you just open-minded about how the interview was going to take place?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that you couldn't appreciate on this is that as the interview was going on, we were having a major weather event. I mean, it was raining by a poolside. I mean, the rain was coming. I thought the power was going to go out. So I was completely and utterly stressed out about that. And I thought, oh my God, here's my history with Paul. Every time I've had an interview, it's been a near miss. And now it's going to be, the power is going to go out and it's going to be weather. So I was a little stressed out about that. But I had said to myself, just go for it. Just ask. Don't think about anything. And I didn't know. I mean, I was careful in the sense that there's a lot of questions that you can ask that are just going to annoy somebody. If you come on, your first question is, hey, why is Ace Frehley not there? Well, first of all, that's not really nice. It's sort of silly. Maybe the fans want to hear that. Okay, but do you really want to be that guy who just asked the So how can I put this? I wasn't concerned about where it was going to go. I was more, in fact, worried about the weather than anything else. I just figured, you know what? Ask the questions, and if he hangs up, then he'll hang up. But I didn't think he would. I didn't. You know what? Because Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons and they're all at the level that if they don't want to talk to you, or if they think it's going to go bad, they're just going to tell the publicist, don't bother. And that's it. They don't have a need. Some of the smaller bands that are still playing clubs, they may or may not like your face, but sometimes they don't have a choice because, and I don't mean that to be disrespectful, but some of them are going out to play clubs and there's 30 fans there on a Saturday night. So they need a Mitch Lafon or an Eddie Trunk or a Chris Jericho to talk about them, to sort of provide extra fans and get the word out. And they have to talk to you, whether they like, when you're Metallica or Kiss or Aerosmith, if they don't like you, they don't like they just won't. So no, I thought if he was doing the interview, it's because he wanted to be there and it was going to go smooth. So no, like I said, the biggest concern was really the power's going to go out. He breaks his ribs. I got Gene Simmons instead, the editor, and now it's going to be rain. Like, really, you know.
But you were lucky. The rain did not.
It did not knock out the power, but holy mackerel! At the very beginning of the interview, within the first 5 minutes, I was asking Paul a question, and I sort of lost the train of thought, and that's because it had gone from a light gray to a pitch black, and it was pounding down. And I was like, yeah, blah 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 blah, and it startled me, and I just went, oh, and then I just went, okay, back to the question, and then Paul took over, and I was like, oh, but I can hear it in the audio because I know where it happened. I haven't heard anybody comment about it. I was sort of expecting people to say, hey, at the beginning there, you seemed a little nervous. I was like, yeah, not nervous about talking to Paul, nervous that my roof was about to cave in on my head. So I know it's there in the first like 5-10. I think it was like the second or third question I asked. You can hear there was like so tell me about the blah, 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 blah. Oh, what's that?
That's awesome. That's absolutely brilliant. What most surprised you about Paul during this conversation with him?
Oh, well, what we said before. He was just exceptionally open and honest. We have all heard 100 interviews with Gene and Paul and all the other guys, even the Bret Michaels and all that, and they seem to have a little script, and they seem to be on. Well, not a script, because that sounds insulting, but they're on message and they're on point, and they are going to get out their message whether the question is posed properly or not. And there didn't seem to be a message here. It was like, okay, ask me whatever you want, and I'm going to answer it honestly. He didn't seem to be on message. And I don't know, you've done interviews with other people. Sometimes it's just, this is what I'm selling, and I don't care what your question you're asking. Like when you talk to Gene with the box set or the vault, you'd say, so Gene, tell me about Kiss. And he'd go, hey, have you heard about the vault? And you're like, right. And then you say, all right, so how is it working with Ace? Hey, have you heard about the vault? And you're like, okay. And we've all done those interviews. And this one, I didn't get any of that. I just said, like, if you listen to that Eric Carr answer at the end, I thought that was remarkably open and honest and very different. He goes, I didn't think Eric would die. I don't think I've ever heard him say that. Listen, I've not heard every interview that Paul's ever done, but I think somewhere in the ether, had he said that, it would have appeared somewhere on KissFAQ or on a Facebook page. And I thought, wow, he actually had a true fear and you sometimes forget as we go on the message boards and stuff and we criticize, we go, you know what, there is a human element that we forget about. It probably did freak him out that this was happening to a band member, and we all respond differently to how things freak us out. And so that was a very human element and a very human kind of emotion to that answer, which I hadn't heard before. And that was just remarkably refreshing to hear,
I think one of the things as consumers of interviews, as well as someone who does do interviews, is that it's very important not to project what you think about a topic with what the answer is that you receive from the person who is actually there. There's a vast difference between the two. And when you ask Paul or Gene or Ace or whomever a question, you're going to get their perception of their memory of it, or however they want to answer it at the time. It may not marry up with what you think you know, and that's, to everyone who does read, whether it's on the FAQ, whether it's on Facebook or anywhere, what you think you know is not necessarily going to be what they know, and you have to take their answer at face value because they were there.
Well, I do find that some interviewers go in with an agenda. And they try to promote that agenda, or they try to get the artist to fit into their agenda about saying something bad about a band member, or saying something bad about an album, or talking about whatever. And a good interview, I think, doesn't go in there with an agenda like you're saying. And I think it was important to not have any kind of preconceived notions of what Paul might say. Anyway, at the end of the day, I'm thrilled with the interview. I think Kiss was thrilled with it. They put it up on Kiss Online. which is very, very rewarding. You know, we're fans when you look at it and I don't want to keep saying at the end of the day, but I'm going to keep saying at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, we're fans. And if you had told 11-year-old me that at some day on some official Kiss thing, they would recognize something you did speaking to the front man, you go, nah, that's never going to happen. And then here it is, you know. In a small way, you're part of the Kiss history. I mean, exceptionally small way. Let's not kid ourselves. But it's nice to say, you know what? When we get down to the footnotes, there's a little as told to Mitch Lafon, and that's nice. It's kind of cool. And you know, you have the same stuff, you know, done by Julian. And it tickles you pink, right?
Yeah, you know, it feels good just to be, whether it's a fleck of lint on the cape of the demon, you know, not to even be a part of the story, just to be that fleck of dirt or whatever is enough.
Really is.
You don't need to be more. But before we wrap here, I do want to just get your thoughts on I think you were calling it the end of the world, the end of the road.
End of the road.
The end of the road. And
well, I called it One Last Kiss, the end of the road. And quite frankly, they had put out a graphic on Twitter or something, and it said One Last Kiss. So that's what I was calling it, but it is the end of the road.
The end of the road, indeed. So how do you feel as a very long-term fan who has, you know, had personal interactions with every member of the band? Yep. What's this mean to Mitch?
Well, listen, it is, I don't want to say disappointing in a sense, because you sort of want the band to go on as long as you go on and always be there. It's sort of like a comfy blanket. You know, you're like Linus with that little blanket and you just don't want to let go, right? But at the end of the day, the fact that they won't be touring doesn't bother me, because they don't come to Montreal every time. They don't. So I haven't actually seen them in like 2 years or 3 years. So I'm sort of used to not seeing them. But of course, Kiss is not going to end. We all know that. When the members do pass away, if I'm still here, they'll get into the vaults and there'll be a unreleased this and unreleased. Like, Kiss is going to be here for minimally, the next 30 years, whether you're around, I'm around, Paul's around, because there's going to be vaults. I mean, look at Jimi Hendrix. We're in 2018 and they're still releasing stuff and they're still new. So if they can do that with Jimmy, who was around for like 5 or 6 years, just imagine what we're going to get from the Kiss archives for the next. So yeah, Kiss as a touring band will end. Okay, but there'll be deluxe editions, whatever. There'll be probably DVDs and videos. They probably will even have the hologram tour at some point. So Kiss touring maybe is over, but Kiss the entity, that's not going to end. It's certainly not going to end in my lifetime. I think we're all, at our age, we're all going to pass away before the Kiss vaults are empty.
Oh, yeah, just when they've emptied one barrel, they discover a new one, as you've mentioned with Jimi Hendrix. It's always the case. And it's not like when they come off the road for that after that very last show that everyone's Kiss albums disintegrate. It doesn't end. I'm sure Gene would love it if everyone's did, because then you'd have to buy a new set, and he'd be there waiting with a new set of CDs for you to buy, or whatever format it is by then. So it's not the end. It's just the end of a chapter, right, in their story.
Yeah, and you look at 2023, there'll be the 50th anniversary. Do I think Kiss will reunite and go on a tour? No, I don't. Do I think we might see a special, 4-song set, 10-song set in LA? Yeah, I do. Will they do like a special something in New York just to celebrate 50? Yeah, I think they will. I don't think that if they're still around and still capable that we won't see that. So will we see tours of 200 shows? No. Will we see one-off? Like I said in the interview, if the Super Bowl calls and says in 2022, hey, we want Kiss at the halftime show, you know what? I think they would. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. So tours are over.
Yeah, and Paul kept options open. I mean, Paul's a smart guy. He's not going to say, no, that's the end of absolutely everything. At this point, again, they never know from one year to the next. I think over the past 18 months or so, with people like Tom Petty passing, who was it, Glenn Fry, all of these artists who are not really old.
David Bowie.
Yeah, it becomes a question of mortality. How do you close one chapter and leave pages yet to be written? You leave the option for them to be written or not. And who knows what they may decide to do or not to do. And I think after 45 years, how much more do we need? I mean, we could be selfish and say, don't go, don't go, don't go. But here they get to at least do it on their own terms. And I think it's probably wiser. Go out the way you want to while you can, because when you don't have that decision power, it's a terrible thing. And not to coin Ace's no regrets, but it's better to have as few regrets as possible.
Right. And listen, the one thing we know about artists is that whether it's The Who or Ozzy or even Kiss or the Scorpions, they will say farewell. They'll do these farewell tours. But as an artist, you always want to create. And at some point, so I don't think we've seen the end. I think we're only seeing the end of touring Kiss, not of the brand, the band. There'll be something somewhere down the road.
Well, that's a great way to end this, and I do thank you for leaving some questions unasked. That gives us the rest of us hoping for interviews with Paul. Hope that one day we will get in there with some of those other questions that we would love to pin him into a corner. No, not so much pin him into a corner, but hopefully get him in the mood to reflect on some specific topics. But, very well done, Mitch. I enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And, as you did to Paul, thank you for all that you do for music fans like me, because that wasn't the only one of your interviews that I listened to, and it's great that you are out there providing that conduit between the fans and the artist to the fans. It's a great thing that you do, so congratulations and keep doing what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much. And of course, thank you for having that KissFAQ website. It is great to get in there and discuss the band and stuff. And I do want to end on just saying thank you again to Paul. He was incredibly gracious, incredibly nice. And it was sincere, and it is sincere when I say, thank you for 45 years. I was along for the ride for 40 of those. I wasn't there in 73, 70. Yes, I was born, but I, of course, I wasn't a baby. I wasn't a fan in diapers. But thank you, because it has been something you could go to. It was that steady force in life when girlfriends were changing and schools was changing and all that. There was always that sort of rock that you could go, you know what? I don't care how bad today is. I can go listen to Double Platinum and I'll be fine by the end of it.
It's the soundtrack to our lives. And
absolutely.
That's the thing. All right, Mitch LaFawn, thank you very much, and we will see you online. So take care for now.
Cheers.
Thank you for spending time listening to the KissFAQ podcast today. All sales are final. There are no refunds. If you'd like, look us up on Facebook or come over to the KissFAQ message board and discuss the topic we've broadcast today. Don't forget to rate us on iTunes, Spreaker, or wherever you've listened to the show. We hope you'll join us again.